Good evening, everyone. It is once again Ted the Speed Learner, and this is yet another edition of my For My Students video series. And this particular one is going to go out to these two people, and I will explain that in a little bit. But first of all, a quick note, well, a couple of quick notes. First of all, Happy New Year's to everybody. Thank you for watching me here in 2017, and I hope to serve your needs as I continue on through 2018. I really hope that I get a chance to finish Euclid's Elements. I will be presenting more math stuff than you've ever seen in your entire life. Oh, you have no idea all the things I have. And yes, I am working on more Kindle books. You're like, wait, he's working on more Kindle books? Yep, that's exactly what I'm doing. So, hang in there, folks. Anyway, let's go on here. I want to issue a brief apology to D. Lukens 9, and that's because I did not present the UPS situation correctly on my UPS video. I was discussing UPS shipping and how they couldn't get the packages to me. I didn't correctly explain this. UPS will not accept P.O. Box information at all. So I had to give them my home address. But here's the problem. They have this thing called SurePost. I'll say that again. UPS has a service called SurePost. And when companies use it, UPS doesn't finish up the delivery. Okay? So what happens is that they print my home address on the box, and then at the end of the delivery cycle, just before they're supposed to actually deliver it to the house, okay, instead of UPS finishing it up and actually delivering it to my house, they deliver it to the local post office station. Now, when the post office station actually gets the box, they don't check their computer to see if I have a home address and a P.O. box. They just see the address on there, and they're like, well, that address doesn't exist, so they just start the procedures immediately to ship it on back. And the only way I know about it is that UPS then tells me they couldn't complete the delivery. But it really wasn't them completing the delivery. It was actually the post office that was supposed to complete the delivery. Okay? And that gets into a huge problem. The thing is that had UPS allowed me to print my P.O. Box information on the package as well as my home address, then when they arrived at the post office, the postal people could have looked at that and said, oh yes, this particular gentleman has a P.O. box. So either they could have put the box inside of my P.O. box, or they could have left a note for me, and then I could have arranged for a day to have gone up there and actually picked it up, especially since they needed a signature, which was fine. Or well, no, they really didn't need a signature. They just needed me to show my ID. They needed me to show my ID to get the package. And I would have loved to have done that at a more convenient time. But not on a day when I'm suddenly rushed through retail Christmas to go to work. And that's the problem. That's something UPS needs to update. Even if they're not going to deliver to a P.O. box, they can actually have that printed on the box so that if they give it to the post office then can recognize what's going on and put it in my box. Or put a note in my box. Doesn't matter. That's the system that needs to be fixed. See what I mean? So now, let's go to these people, and let's talk to this one first. I'm going to tell you why I'm going to talk to this one first. And that's because you are a bit presumptuous. You seem to think that just because I did not agree with the method that Jeff Bliss used to debate the high school packets, that somehow I must like high school packets. That's absolutely wrong. 100% totally wrong. And I'll prove that in this video. So what was I objecting to? Well, it certainly was not, as you have honestly thought. You thought I was objecting to just Jeff Bliss's argument. No, I was objecting to the manner in which he presented his argument. Okay? And I know I stutter and I know I stammer, so just hang on it. I'll get to the point. So, what should Jeff Bliss what should he have done? Well, I'm going to show you. Because I'm now going to reply to the second person here. Now, I've already blocked him. And I've got good reason to block him. He starts a rant about how it's all my fault, or at least partially my fault, that I got my track phone shut off. And I'm going to show to him that even though I did make one mistake, and I never listed this because I didn't really discover it until recently, other than this one little mistake, everything else was actually their fault. And I'm going to show that as well. Now then, what was the one mistake I made? I had no idea that TrackPhone had been sending me emails into my other email account. You see, I have 2 email accounts with 2 different companies. One that I use all the time and one that I rarely use at all. Now, in the old days, I used to use the other one quite a bit. And when I enrolled in TrackPhone for the very first time, I enrolled using that email address, the one I hardly use anymore. Well, the thing is, mistake number 1 of TrackPhone is that they have a poor website. It does not work very well. And I've had a heck of a time changing my email address from the one I rarely use anymore to the email that I use nowadays. Okay? Because I had to acquire this new email address, the one I'm using now, due to YouTube. YouTube forced me into this email account. If it hadn't, I would have stayed with the other one. Oh well. So having said all of that, that's your first mistake. Had I been able to have told TrackPhone a long time ago that my new email was the one I'm using now, probably a lot of this wouldn't have happened. I would have known something was wrong and I would have dealt with it. But anyway, I did find out from another YouTuber who came to my video and had read all those comments that phones like that don't get shut off for at least 60 days. It wasn't like that I never used the phone, I just didn't use it for 30 days. Okay? So that's another mistake that TrackPhone makes. If we are forced to use the phone every 30 days to keep the service active and not get it shut off, well, then that should be printed clearly on the front of the box, not hidden somewhere in some instruction book that's thousands of pages long. I mean, I like reading material, but I am not going to sit there and read through thousands and thousands of pages of text, especially when it isn't necessary. That should have been clearly on the front of the box. If you don't use this at least once every 30 days, it's going to get shut off. News to me. So that's mistake number 2. Now, mistake number 3 comes from this little hotshot. And I'll tell you, he was quite a hotshot. First, he was telling me how brilliant he was. And I probably will make a supplemental video to show you the difference between his credentials and mine. Because he does not have near the credentials he thinks he does. And he was telling me that he speaks fluent English. I didn't have enough time tonight to print up all the things that he said, but I will in a supplemental video. I will have another For My Students video to show you the difference between proper English and what this guy was speaking. You can decide for yourself if he's speaking fluent English or not. Not as fluent as he'd like to think. Stand there telling me he speaks 3 languages. Well, I speak a little Spanish. I definitely speak Italian. You've seen that. I can read and write Latin. You've seen that too. So don't tell me about anything. And I too have a degree. Sure, it came from a vocational center, but still it's a degree nonetheless. and it qualifies. Actually, I was the second from the top in that particular class. I also went to college, and I maintained my GPA, and I'll tell you this, that had I not run out of the Pell Grant, I would have graduated from college. So, eat those facts. Alright, so what's the biggest mistake of them all? Well, in order to comprehend the biggest mistake that this guy actually made, we have to go into telephone history. Okay. When the telephone was first invented, they were sold in pairs. You had a pair of telephones, okay? Now, one was sold to person A and one was sold to person B. Now, back then, most towns were not as big as they are today. So, selling to person A and person B was no big deal. And they hooked them up. So, person A would turn the crank on his telephone, and the ringer on person B's phone would start ringing. Okay? And it was this ringing that motivated person B to actually pick up the receiver and listen to person A's conversation. Alright. After a while, thousands of telephones were sold across the United States. Okay? Well, this was slowly putting the telegraph industry out of business. A lot of those telegraph lines were converted into telephone lines. And there went the telegraph office. Okay? Now, it was about this time that there were very specific people that were hired and trained, and these specific people were called telephone operators. And they were taught how to operate switchboards, local switchboards. Okay? And it's because if you look at the very earliest telephone switchboards, you'll see these tons of wires. Well, that's why. What would happen is the person A would dial up into the switchboard, and he would tell the person at the switchboard to connect me to person B or person C or person D, and they would take a special wire and they would connect you with the person you're trying to call. And that's how it worked. Okay? So, why were telephone numbers created when you had telephone operators that could connect you from person A to person B to person C, so on and so forth? Well, the switchboards got bigger. That was part of it. But the real reason has to go to a Dr. Moses Greeley Parker. According to Rebecca A. Duda, that's right, an author, Dr. Parker was born in 1842. As a young adult, he graduated from Harvard Medical School. Then he served in the Union Army during the last part of the Civil War. And you can read about him. There, I have an article down here in the description below. You can read about him. Now, Dr. Parker established a medical practice in Lowell, Massachusetts. After he began serving as president of the Middlesex North District Medical Society, he became a member of the executive committee of the New England Telephone and Telegraph Company. You're like, well, this is kind of boring, but no, there is a point to this. In 1879, there was a measles epidemic in Lowell, Massachusetts. Now, at the time, they only had 200 residents. But for those 200 residents, they had 4 young men operating the switchboard. Okay. Now, at that point, Dr. Parker became concerned about the gentleman operating the switchboard. Why? Because there was a measles outbreak, and he was afraid that one or more of them might contract the measles, and if they did, they couldn't effectively operate the switchboards. And have you ever brought in a new trainee, especially one that didn't live in Lowell, Massachusetts, and would have no idea about half the residents that lived there? That became a problem. So, What did he do? Well, he went to Alexander Graham Bell, and he says, look, he says, we need to create a numbering system. We need to associate every name of every person who owns a telephone in Lowell, Massachusetts with a number. And by doing so, it will be a lot easier if anybody contracts the measles. We could bring somebody new in, and they could connect people via numbers instead of names, because they would have no idea who these people were, but they would know numbers. And it would be a lot faster and a lot more efficient. Well, Alexander Graham Bell and this Dr. Parker sat together, and they developed the very first telephone numbering system. And that's why we have telephone numbers today. And we have more articles down here in the description below. You can read about all of this. Okay. Now then, when these telephone numbers were created, the letters of the English alphabet were associated with each digit. Okay. The letters Q and Z were left out of the number association. So Q and Z were not represented by a digit. Okay. The first 2 digits of the phone number represented the town that the person lived in. The remaining 5 digits represented the person that was being called. And again, we have more articles that will tell you all that as well. But as years passed, more switchboards were built. This got to be somewhat of a problem. Because if you wanted to call somebody, let's say you lived in the south part of a state, okay? Let's say somebody lived in the southernmost part of Illinois, and they wanted to call somebody that lived in the northernmost part of Illinois. Well, how are they going to get the call through? Well, what they did was they first developed what is called a central switchboard, and every state had one in the beginning. And so you would call your local switchboard operator, who would connect you to the central switchboard operator, who would then connect your call to the local switchboard operator of the person you were trying to call, and that person would then connect to the person you were trying to call. Now, at that point, some of the switchboards became more and more automated. Okay? Now, way back then, no telephone number started with the number 1. That was because of technical reasons. And telephone numbers never started with 0 due to the fact that people dialed 0 to contact the operator. Okay? So, when you dialed that 0, you were going to get the operator immediately. That's why telephone numbers never started with 0. Okay? And, yes, there's more web articles down here. Just read all you like. At a certain point, the first 2 letters of a phone number represented the exchange that would handle your telephone call. Remember, this was a switchboard exchange that would actually handle your call. It was no longer some state or some city that you were trying to get a hold of. It was more what exchange was going to be handled. The remaining 5 digits still represented the person you were calling. Now, as the telephone exchanges became more automated and as they became larger, they wouldn't have letters for the first 2, the first 2 digits of a phone number back then were actually letters and not numbers. But then they changed it to all numbers. So you would have a 7-digit number instead of 2 letters and a 5-digit number. Okay? And that's because the switchboards were becoming more and more automated, and there was more of them. Okay. So again, there was another web article that tells you about that too. Now, the story of area codes becomes a little more confusing. I do know they were invented in 1947. From what I understand of all this, and of course, there's a lot of conflicting information, and you can read the articles. I got some articles down here below that you can read all you like. From what I understand, originally every state was issued an area code. That's because of the populations of the state. Think about it. States were getting bigger, more people were living in them, more telephones were getting around. So yes, eventually area codes had to be set up, especially for central switchboard operations. Because remember, your local switchboard would connect you to the central switchboard, who then would connect you to another local switchboard, which would then connect your call. So yeah, that was part of the reason why they had area codes in the first place. But then certain cities in certain states had very high populations. Think about it. There are currently millions of people living in places like Chicago, New York City, Los Angeles, Atlanta, Georgia, and the list goes on and on. Well, they started issuing area codes for those specific cities because of their populations. Okay? Now, another thing that was going wrong on this was that early on, as they were starting to develop the area code, local switchboard offices were developing numerical systems that were different than other local switchboard offices. In other words, if you lived in Town A had a local switchboard office and they had a numbering system there. If you went to Town B, they had another switchboard office, and that switchboard office had a different numbering system, and that's where things really got confusing. So at that time, they quickly developed a uniform numbering system for all local switchboard offices and central switchboard offices. Okay? Now, what company developed all this? Well, that would be the American Telephone and Telegraph Company. Okay, so, like I said, at first every state was assigned an area code, and then eventually every central office was assigned an area code. So, you would have your area code, your central office code, and your code of the customer. Okay, so you'd have an area code. You'd have the central office code, which was the first 3 digits after the area code, and then the remaining 4 digits would be the number of the customer. You can read, I have articles about that too. Alrighty. Now, why was New York City assigned a low area code at first? Well, the reason for that is that they were more populated at the time than Atlanta, Georgia. So they had remember, they were still using rotary phones at the time. They didn't have all those push-button phones back then. They had rotary phones. So it was a lot easier to dial the number 212 than, say, 979. Now, from what I've read up, the second digit of an area code was actually marked 1 when you had to pay for the phone call. Because remember, long-distance calling back then was more expensive than local calling. Local calling usually was free, but if you wanted to do long distance, you had to pay through the nose. Okay? Now then, do we have switchboards today? In most places, the answer is no. What you'll find instead is usually voice over internet protocol. I'll say that again. Voice over internet protocol, which is called your VoIP service. All these phone calls are now transmitted electronically. The phone call, when it goes out, it's turned into electrical signals, which is turned into data packets, and the data packets are then sent over computer lines, and then the other end converts it back, and then you hear the actual sound. So, we have VoIP these days, We have the Facebook Messenger app. We have Skype. We actually have in cell phones something called the Subscriber Identity Module. Now, let me tell you the information that's contained in a Subscriber Identity Module, which is called your SIM card. Okay, that's what Subscriber Identity Module is. It's called SIM. SIM is an acronym for Subscriber Identity Module. The first 3 digits of that particular number tell the cell phone companies what country you're calling from or you actually live in. The next 2 digits tell the cell phone companies which carrier you subscribe to. The last 7 digits are the customer identification code. So, now that more and more people are using VoIP technology, and they're using SIM cards, and they're using the Facebook Messenger, and they're using Skype, and they're using all kinds of teleconferencing services, video conferencing services, will we ever really run out of telephone numbers? The answer is quite honestly, no. So there really should be no reason why, at this point in the game, that a telephone number couldn't be assigned to a person for life. Well, this is your telephone number, and wherever you go and whatever you do, that's going to be your number from now on. You say, well, that's impossible. Well, no, it's not. No, it's not, because it's actually being done right now. That's right. You have phone companies like Vonage and MagicJack. They do this. They say that is your phone number, and no matter where you go from now on, that's your phone number. So it's not impossible to do this. And that's where your biggest mistake is that you're standing there telling me how impossible it is for me to keep my telephone number. It's not impossible at all. I should be able to keep my telephone number. Why not? I mean, think about it. If I had moved from one city to the next, I could have understood possibly losing my phone number. But all I did was move from one side of a city. I moved from the south side of the city to the north side of the city. Why should I have to change my phone number just because I moved less than 5 miles from where I was? I don't even think it was 3 miles. I moved less than 3 miles and I had to suddenly change my phone number? That's stupid, especially in our technological age, when so many people are starting to now give up their phone numbers. Shoot, why would we have a phone number? We have our Facebook Messenger that lets us do voice conferencing. We have Skype. And the next thing that's going to come around is Comcast. And here's what Comcast is going to do. They're going to have more hotspots. They've made agreements with Verizon, and eventually Verizon's going to open up all their hotspots to Comcast. And when they do, shoot, I'm not going to call somebody with an old-time telephone number anymore. I'll just use some kind of VoIP service. Call them more directly. Find out their subscriber identification module. Find out that particular number and call that instead. We may use IP addresses to now call people from one to the next. And you know what that means? That means that people like you, like this guy right here, that thinks he's so smart, he's going to eventually find himself being so unemployed. Why? Because why shouldn't I utilize the Comcast hotspots? Because I have internet with Comcast already. I could drop the tract phone service and go through Comcast exclusively and not bother with something like tract phone anymore. It'd be free to me. I could hook up with a free VoIP service and there you go. Or even Comcast could offer a free VoIP service included in the internet package bundle. Say, you know what, you already have internet with us, VoIP service will be included in that package. They could do that, and if they do, hey, I'm all for that. And yes, even Google, I'm sure right now, is working on a way for you to have voice phone call service without paying anything extra. If they ever do that, and Google runs their fiber optic system all over the country, or they make some agreement with Comcast, there you go. That's the mistakes the TracFone is making. And yes, TracFone could very easily go out of business within the next 10 years, only because they're not keeping up. If you want my continued business, you better straighten your act up. No more of these customer service reps that can't speak English, or at least not speak it fluently. And don't tell me I can't keep my telephone number anymore. It's all databases now. Your name is associated with a number in a database. And we aren't going to run out of numbers, because a lot of people are going to ditch their numbers because they're going to turn to Facebook apps or to Skype or whatever Apple might provide at some point. Or Comcast may come into the picture, or Google may come into the picture. Either way, the days of telephone numbers are going to finally come to an abrupt end. And that means you're going to go out of business. Why should I continue going through you when I can very easily get free telephone service from Comcast? I guarantee you within the next 5 to 10 years they're going to work all this stuff out. And when they do, goodbye TracFone. It's only a matter of time. So that's what's wrong with your argument. Most of this, except for the emails, and I'll admit I did not read those emails, and I should have. But other than that, like I said, I had another YouTuber wire to me a message that said that those SIM cards should not shut off after 30 days. They should shut off after 60. Well, my phone is never going to be inactive for a full 60 days. I'd eventually use it for a trip or something. I've never gone more than a month without phone service, and that was over the holidays. The only reason why I was off for so long is because it was the holidays and we had snow and everything else, and I didn't do a whole lot of traveling. But here's my point. My point is, that phone shouldn't have been shut off, and you shouldn't have told me that I had to have a new phone number. In this day and age, when I only moved 3 miles from where I was, that's stupid. If I'd have moved to another town, maybe you might have had a case. But I didn't even leave the town that I was living in. I just moved 3 miles north. That's it. That's your mistake. Now, what about the other guy and his little high school packets problem? Let me tell you something. Why would I go on YouTube and constantly teach hour after hour, day after day, if I approved of the high school packets that are being given to children all over this country every single day? That's ludicrous. I no more approve of high school packets than anybody else. My problem was with the way that Jeff Bliss made his presentation. He didn't go to a school board with tons of notes like this and make a full formal presentation citing people with higher credentials than himself. That's not what he did. He threw a tirade in a classroom. Had I been his teacher and had I thoroughly explained what Roman forums and honor challenges were, I'd have thrown him out of the class. That would have been the bare minimum of what I would have done. Do you know that that guy at 18 years old could have very easily, and I'll say this, before I go on, I will say that I owe one apology to Jeff Bliss because I didn't realize he knew nothing about Roman forums or honor challenges. That would have been the first thing I would have told him about before we would have gone into deep class, okay? But with him being 18 years old and him throwing a tirade like that, as a teacher, I would have had the legal right to have charged that kid with disturbing the peace and inciting a riot. I don't know that those charges would have stuck, but I would have had the right to file them, and he would have known what kind of teacher I was, and I would have happily done it. And if it cost me my job, so be it. But I would never have apologized to him. There was no reason for that. He was dead wrong in what he did. So don't tell me how much I approve of high school packets, because I'm telling you, I actually made a video about high school packets. I forget where it is now. It's somewhere among my 3,800 videos. If you want to watch them all and learn a bunch of stuff, go right ahead. But the mere fact that I am presenting this much material over the past 8 years, that should clearly show you I do not approve of high school packets any more than Jeff Bliss did. I wasn't angry because he took a stand against high school packets. I was angry because he didn't have the credentials to take that kind of stand, and he didn't do it in a proper format. Had he done it the way it should have been done, there you go. And that's why I said what I said about Jeff Bliss. He did not state his case properly, in a proper forum, with proper materials. He should have given a presentation like this, and not done what he did. That's what I'm talking about. Anyway, I think now you can see the difference between the way I handled that telephone situation and the way Jeff Bliss handled the high school packet situation. So don't be coming to me and telling me that I approve of high school packets, because that's simply not true. Alright. Well, my students, my studenti, have you learned? Are you comprehending what I'm telling you here? I don't blame Jeff Bliss for objecting to high school packets. I blame Jeff Bliss for not giving a proper presentation in a proper forum. That's the difference. And no, I do not approve of high school packets, and that's why I teach here. I don't approve of Common Core either. That's a well-known fact. If you'd watched enough of my videos, you'd know this. Alright. Whew. I'm exhausted. How about the rest of you? Well, anyway, I hope in 2018 people will finally grasp the things I'm saying. They will make better presentations. They will do better things to improve life in general. And maybe they'll learn a few things. Alright. Well, I want to thank you guys for watching this presentation. And I'll put this hat on one more time. I'd put it on a little earlier for the video response wars, but Happy New Year's, everybody. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have watched the whole presentation and realized what I'm truly saying. And maybe you learned a few things. Alright. This is Ted the Speed Learner signing off. I wanted to say Happy New Year's to everybody. I hope you had a wonderful year in 2017. I'm looking forward to telling you a whole bunch of brand new stuff in 2018. So, again, thank you very much. You all have a wonderful New Year's, and if you have anything to tell me, please send it my way. I'll be happy to listen to you. Alright, I will tell you more in future videos coming up in 2018, so I'd like for you to stay tuned.